a couple of practices, one with you, Jessica, and one with my agent, and one with my editor, but that's been it. So I'm brand new at this, and I am sitting in my little office. I hope you can see it. I tried to arrange it so that you could see my bookcase, but you can't figure out what the titles are. For all you people who watch Zoom events like Judy Woodward on the nightly news on public television, or these other people that are broadcasting remotely, I don't know about you, but I'm always looking at the bookcase. You know, what do they have on their bookcase? What are they reading, you know? And do they ever change it? Do they ever move a book around? They don't move any books around. So anyway, here I am in my little office talking to you, and thank you for that introduction, although I'm totally bored by it. You know, I hate these introductions. It's like, when did writers become celebrities, you know? We were just supposed to be writers who wrote books that people loved and they would go out and buy. But no, now we have to be celebrities, and I'm not very good at that. Anyway, Head Wounds. Want to see what it looks like?
Yes, please.
There it is. Can you see it? That's the book that all of you are going to rush out and call Dorothy Massey at Collected Works and buy copies. You know, if all of my Facebook friends, I'm on Facebook. I didn't want to be, but my agent made me be. If all my Facebook friends, all my followers bought a book, I'd be a New York Times bestseller overnight. So call Dorothy and order a book. And by the way, you'll be able to get a signed book from Dorothy, which will be very nice. You know, there are not going to be too many of those because nobody's doing book tours anymore. And so I can't go around to various stores and do tours and sign copies. So it'll make them even rarer and more valuable. And on top of that, it's a damn good story. So what are we going to do, Jessica? We had a plan, but I can't remember it because
I think we want to know why you've decided to end the Kevin Kerney series. I know a bunch of people are going to be crushed.
Getting a lot of negativity about that. Many, many years ago, before Tula Rosa was ever published, I stood on a balcony in a house in the mountains of Vermont with my wife and my then editor and his then girlfriend. And I said to these people, I said, please don't let me ever turn into a writer who keeps writing when it's clear he should have stopped. And I said, if I ever do that, give me a big boot in the derriere. Well, nobody's had to do that yet, but it's been a goal of mine to never keep writing just for the sake of a contract or book sales or anything of that nature, because I've seen too many writers do that. I didn't want to do it. I don't think I'm there yet because I'm under contract for another book that I think it's going to be really great. But keeping that in mind, I thought to myself, you know, you have a chance to bring everything to a conclusion, to a sort of a denouement of a series, if you will. And why don't you do that? And it makes sense for me to do that because that's the kind of person I am. I've always been a person who has said, well, I've done this, I want to do that. Or I finished doing that, so what do I want to do next? And so finishing, ending things to start new things has always been something that I, by personality, am inclined to do. The other part is that I wrote a series with a character who ages. There are a lot of crime novels and mystery novels out there where more or less the protagonist is frozen in time. I'll give you an example. Everybody probably knows who Sue Grafton was. She wrote the alphabet mysteries, A's for this, B's for that, C's. And we lost Sue a couple of years ago. She was a sweet, sweet lady, really, really nice lady. But when she was asked about her protagonist aging, she said, well, you know, I turned 70, and my protagonist maybe has aged 5 years over the course of that 20-some volume of mystery books. So she's one of an example of a writer who did that. Ed McBain, who wrote the 87 Precinct Mysteries, did it. John McDonald, who wrote the Travis McGee Mysteries, did it. Michael Connelly's kind of doing it because Harry Bush isn't really, getting that old, but Michael's getting older. Anyway, I didn't do any of that. I had a character who was going to grow and develop and progress and have a life that went beyond just being a cop solving crimes. And so I did 12 Kerney novels, the first 12. And you saw him starting out as a recovering cop who had been wounded, who's trying to find a relationship with somebody and has a partial success, but it doesn't work out, who meets a very fascinating young career Army officer who's on her way to a brilliant, brilliant future in the US Army. And he grows and develops along the way. And he finds love, and he marries, and he has a family, and he finds out he has another family that he didn't know anything about, and it keeps growing and developing and growing. And in Head Wounds, well, my protagonist is 70 years old. Now, Hollywood can have Harrison Ford at 75 falling in love with a 30-year-old ingenue, right? They can get away with it. I think it's totally silly and ridiculous, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So I had a choice. I could either freeze Kerney in time for this next book for Head Wounds. I could give him a calamity that he had to confront and deal with, right? Or I could say, it's time for Kerney to retire. Not only does he retire in Head Wounds, but he takes the back step, and he's not in the forefront. Who is in the forefront? Well, his half-Apache Navajo son, who's also a cop, Clayton Istee. So people have said to me, well, just keep the series going with Clayton. It just couldn't happen. The story just wouldn't let me happen that way. And so it was time to bring it to a close. Did I say a close? Did I mean a close? Anyway, this brings the Kerney series to an end. But you have to remember there's a trilogy that goes beyond Kerney's life and before Kerney's life. So I've had the Kerney series. This will be the 14th book with Head Wounds. I've had the prequel trilogy, which is all about his ancestors and 4 generations of the Kerneys living in New Mexico. And my next book is going to be a spin-off. And it's going to be a spin-off not about Kerney, not about Clayton. It's going to be a spin-off about Kerney's wife, Sarah, who has a story to tell on her own, a family story to tell on her own. So a series, a prequel trilogy, and a spin-off, and we'll see what happens after that. So there you have it. There's my rationale, and I'm sorry if I've made anybody unhappy, but this is the way I had to go.
That's so exciting. I think that sounds great. That's perfect rationale, and I can't wait to hear her story.
It's great to do these events, stay home and get drunk.
Yeah. So you like?
What are we going to do next?
You want to do the page reading?
Oh, we did talk about that. I don't know if I'm sober enough to do it. We can give it a try.
At least one page.
Sure, we can do that. Now, here's the way it goes. Here's my wrap. And for those of you who have come out to some of my in-person book signings, you know this little wrap. Most writers will start with the backstory about their main character, and they'll read from chapter 1. They'll say, my main character, blah, 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 and then chapter 1, and they read, and they go on and on and on. They read too much. what happens to writers, unfortunately, to all of us, including me, is we have a tendency to fall in love with our words. And sometimes the words can be very beautiful, but they can be really not needed. So a good writer will learn to cut out some of the good stuff and get to the core. What I have said, and I've challenged other writers to do this, I haven't heard of anyone who's done it. If you write a good book, if you tell a good story, if you're a good storyteller, if everything holds up, you should be able to open the book to any page, any given page, and entertain, perhaps, inform, engage, or keep somebody's attention. And I believe that's a really great test to do as a writer, even if you do it only for yourself as you're writing a book. So Jessica does not have a book, unfortunately. Nobody thought to send Jessica a book. You know, it's probably her chief librarian's fault. She's probably hoarding that book at home and reading it and not sharing it with you, Jessica. I'm sorry she did that. The other reason could be that nobody sent her a book. I certainly didn't send her a book. I just got my books last week. I haven't sent anybody a book except my, who did I send a book to? I sent a book to one of my former editors. So that's it. So you're going to have to trust me when Jessica says, read from page so-and-so, that I don't just goof it up and read from another page that I like better. Right, Jessica?
Exactly right. So I can't go beyond page 300, is that right?
You can't go beyond 307.
Okay.
In fact, you shouldn't go beyond 300 because that would get into the denouement and it would ruin the story for everybody. We don't want to do that.
Okay. I'm going to choose page 103.
103. Take all the time you need. 103. Oh, gee, I don't seem to have that page. Okay, actually. All right, this is a really short scene, so we've got something good going here. Hampered by his twisted ankle, Fernando Olguin stuck to the arroyo until it petered out some distance behind the village center, close to a manufactured home, with lights on inside and two vehicles parked near the front door. There was no cover in the open field beyond. He sank down under a large juniper tree, pain throbbing from his foot to his knee, his face wet with sweat and blood. He wiped his eyes and concentrated on what to do next. Cloud cover under a weak quarter moon made it hard to see. Unfamiliar with the terrain, he wasn't sure of the best way to get to his vehicle without detection. As his heavy breathing slowed, he listened intently to any sound of a car on nearby dirt roads or the crunch of footfalls on the frozen ground. All was quiet. Staying put wasn't an option. He'd have to risk it. Gingerly, he got to his feet, opened his parka, unholstered his 9mm semi-automatic, stuck it in the front pocket, and set off at the fastest pace he could muster. As he reached the open field, the sound of car tires on a dirt road goaded him forward. He barely crossed the open field and found cover in the dark shadows of a building where a vehicle passed and turned onto the paved street behind the village center. That's 103, part of 103. There's more. But that's a little scene in and of itself.
That's perfect. Thank you. Do you want to read another, or shall we get to some questions?
Look at page.
Okay.
Is that Maria hiding up in the corner?
Yes, it is. How about page 37.
Early on. Okay. 37.
Yeah, going backwards now.
All right, 37. Well, that starts a chapter, actually. That starts chapter 3. Following the instructions that came with his airline ticket, Clayton left LAX on a metro bus, got off in downtown, walked to a light rail station, and took the train to a stop in East LA. He left the station and walked along the empty sidewalk next to the roar and blur of never-ending traffic, wondering if there was any place in the city where stillness and silence existed. He doubted it. The nature of the cityscape, unfriendly to pedestrians, further soured his already unhappy mood. He'd obeyed Haro's demand not to tell Grace where he was going or why, but by doing so, he'd broken a family pact they had made years ago to always know how to find one another. Here he was, with Grace unaware of his whereabouts, undercover, without a cell phone or police ID, in a strange city with no backup, about to meet a DEA agent he knew nothing about. There you go.
I love it. I think that's how I'm going to choose books from now on. Just open one page.
Okay, don't start at the beginning. Just open a page and see if that writer can grab you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, let's take some questions if that's okay with you.
Sure.
If you have any questions, just type it in the chat box or Q&A. Karen Cox asks, in your future books, will you be talking as the woman character?
I write in third person. And so I don't write first person, and that would be what you would want me to do, what you would think I would do if I was talking as her. And I won't do that. I've learned better. In fact, learning how to write female characters was not an easy task. And my sweetie pie would look at, when I was trying to become a writer, would look at me sort of quizzically and say, you know, I don't think a woman would ever say that, you know, or I don't think she would think that. And so she had to sort of school me in learning the vernacular of what it takes to build a female character. And I think I'm pretty good at it now. I think I've got it. But it wasn't something that came naturally or came easily. So when I do the spin-off, which the working title is called The Long Ago, yeah, I'll be talking about some very important female characters, but it won't be in the first person.
Okay. Let's see. Do you have a favorite live mystery writer? No.
My favorite mystery writer of all time was Tony Hillerman, who was also a friend of mine. And I do have to put in a plug. I don't know if many people know this or not, but some years ago, Tony and I established a creative writing scholarship at the University of New Mexico, which is fully endowed, and it's the Hillerman Mcgarrity Creative Writing Scholarship. Tony stands shoulder above other mystery writers, except for some of the classics like Raymond Chandler and his work, people of that ilk. But no, I actually don't read a lot of mysteries. And the reason for that is because there's really two reasons. One is I don't want, for example, Sue Grafton or Michael Connelly or Ian Rackin's voice in my head. I don't want that. I have to have my own voice. And the other thing is a lot of mystery writers write books that really aren't grounded in reality. You know, they're just not. And as a former police officer, that just pulls me right out of the story. So I tend to read a lot of fiction, but not a lot of mysteries. I even read more nonfiction, more history, more biography, and all of that kind of feeds into what I want to do when I start writing my own stories. It's a long-winded answer for a short question.
Thank you. Karen says, I live just down the Lamy Crest near Galisteo Basin Preserve. When I read about Kearney's ranch south of Santa Fe, it sounded like that was the location. Is that right?
Yeah, it was the location before that became the preserve. And I know the family, and so I know that land. And so before that became a conservation preserve, I set Kearney's ranch there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful spot. When I describe that drive that he has to take to get up to the top of the hill where his ranch is located, it should still be there. I haven't been out there in a while. But the family that owned that ranch, that sold it, are still really good friends of mine. And yeah, so it was based on actual spot that I picked for that lovely little ranch that he has.
That's great. James asks, how do you stay up with current police procedures when writing?
Research, lots of research. You know, when I was with the sheriff's department, we didn't even have semi-automatic handguns. We had 357s. We had a terrible, terrible communication system that I helped change and get a new one set in. We were way behind the curve. Even then, we were way behind the curve. I stay current by doing the research. And I also stay current by having a lot of friends that are current or past, not only cops, but prosecutors, in some cases judges, that really like my work, and I can tap into that and say, hey, I need some answers. Can you bring me up to speed on what people are doing with blah, 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 whatever it is that I'm looking at.
That's great. Do you ever catch any flack about some things written about truth or consequences?
Yeah, I get flack. I'll tell you my favorite story about getting flack, and it's not about truth or consequences, and it's about Alamogordo. In one of my books, I'm the best-selling novelist in Alamogordo, New Mexico. I sell more books than anybody in Alamogordo. They love me. And so I was doing a book signing at Hastings. Remember there was a book store called Hastings? It was it was all over the Southwest, and then it went out of business. And this sort of very, I don't know how to describe her, sort of a club woman, a woman of social stature, a woman of substance, both intellectually and physically and socially, came up to the desk where I was signing, and she said, I have a bone to pick with you, Mr. Mcgarrity. And I said, well, what's that, ma'am? She said, in this book, you said Alamogordo was just a two-bit dinky stop in the road. You just put Alamogordo down. And behind her was this old cowboy, and he leaned around her and looked up at her. He said, hell, I've lived here all my life, and it is. So, you know, yeah, I get flack, but it's okay. I try to give an honest portrayal of the places that I write about, and sometimes they're not always favorable.
Sure. I have to tell you, there's a lot of comments. There are no questions, just want to say how excited they are for the book. I really like this one I want to share with you. Not a question, this is Leon Duran.
Oh, Leon, I've known him since he was 5 years old.
He says, hi from Denver to Michael, my former Cub Scout master back in Santa Fe at Salazar Elementary in the 1970s.
That's right. Leon knows, I told Leon this. He hasn't read the book yet, but I did tell him, I said, Leon, I borrowed your name for a character in Head Wounds. So there's a character in Head Wounds named Leon Duran, He's just going to have to find out who he is and whether he likes him or not. I won't say anything more.
Oh, that's so cool. Let's see. Well, let's wrap this up. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I see more questions down there. I see 9 questions.
Okay.
My Q&A says 9.
I have answered most of them. I just didn't click to answer them live. There's one.
You have one more?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. Karen asks, what do you think about the militarization of the police?
I'm against it. I've spoken about this. As a matter of fact, in one of my books, one of my early books, I think it was Serpent Gate. At the time, the district attorney was a fellow by the name of Chet Walters. He was a good guy, and I knew him when I was a cop, and I knew him when I was working for the public defender as an investigator. And I had a scene in there where, if I remember correctly, SWAT was brought out, or it was being contemplated that they were going to bring out SWAT. And I talked about that issue in that book. This book came out in 1999, I think it came out. And even back then, I was concerned about the fact that we were taking the police and moving them from a recognizable community force of people who related to everybody and was known by many people, and we were turning them into combat troops. So I have been opposed not only to the militarization of the police, but the projection of it in the media as something that has to happen in every cop show, in every crime movie. You always see these guys in their combat gear storming in with their assault weapons and their body armor and their combat boots and their flashlights. And I think it is an incredible disservice because it projects police as at the least paramilitary, and at the worst, the same thing as being in the armed forces. And I'm against it. I'm totally against it. I dislike it, and I think that we should be resisting it as citizens and saying, no, don't do that. I don't want that. That's not the kind of policing I believe we should be engaged in. Oh, there. Boy, did you get me beamed up on that one.
Thank you so much. Do you one more question?
Okay.
Let's see. Do you ever wish you were born during the days of the prequel?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the year I was born, there were 140 million Americans. The year I was born, I lived as a young child, I lived in a house where we had an outdoor privy, where we had a sink with a pump faucet that only had cold water, where if you wanted a bath, you put the tub on the wood stove and you poured it in the bathtub and you took a bath. I lived in a time before there were interstate highways, before we didn't even have a telephone. When we did have a telephone, it was a party line. And I went to a school where I rode my horse and there was a hitching post out in front. So I don't really think I'm that far removed, 80 years on, from the trilogy. The United States of America was a much different country, and the world was a much different place when I was a child growing up than it is today. My ability to write that trilogy is probably grounded in my own experiences as a child growing up in a rural setting in that kind of an environment. So I'm pretty happy having lived the life I've lived. I hope to continue to do it for a few more years.
Thank you, Michael. For any of you who didn't hear it in the beginning or need a reminder, Michael Mcgarrity is going to have a launch of his new book, Head Wounds, with collected works on November 10th. At that launch, or after the fact, you can get signed copies from collected works. Is there a limited amount? Do you know how many signed copies there will be?
You know, I don't know. I don't think Dorothy has gotten her copies yet, but I'll be going in and signing them before the event. And usually Dorothy buys a goodly number of my books. I'm one of the bestsellers, and she's been a grand supporter forever. And remember to buy local if you can. Remember, we really have to help the Santa Fe economy come back. We have to do all we can to make sure that our especially our culturally important businesses and institutions survive. That's incredibly important for us to do.
Yes, it is. So again, collected works, virtual launch with Michael Mcgarrity on November 10th. Make sure to be there. Make sure to check out the rest of the Santa Fe Library's online events upcoming.
Just got a chat message that said that she loved you. Said we love Jessica.
Oh, thank you.
No, I don't think that. I don't know whether there was another chat message. I don't know whether they'll have signed copies at the Treasure House in Albuquerque. I haven't heard anything from that. I haven't heard anything from Bookworks in Old Town. So I don't know who's going to have signed copies or not. I know that Dorothy will.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. Everyone be safe, read books, and have a great night. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think we managed to muddle our way through this.
Yes.
You've done a great job. My wife, Mimi, says hello.
Mimi.
She missed seeing you because the library isn't open. I want the library to open because I'm spending a fortune on books for her, you know, and I just assumed we would go into the library and check them out. So try to get that library open, Maria.
We'll try our hardest.
We're working on it. Everybody do your part to get the virus numbers down, and hopefully we can open soon. We miss all our patrons.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you,
Thank
Maria.
you, Michael. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.